name is Matthew Sauer. I'm the Collaboration and Impact Officer with the Bransing Foundation. Housing is our topic today. Housing is a basic human need. It's really the overriding human need, the great equalizer. Those of us who have never experienced homelessness or have never struggled with maintaining a roof over our heads or meeting the cost of it probably don't have a frame of reference. But interacting with people facing that struggle, I can tell you that it affects every other aspect of your life. From stress, to mental health, to interactions with your family and friends. The term existential gets thrown around a lot today. Sometimes it's misplaced. In the case of the housing crisis, I don't think existential is an overstatement. This is a threat that poses harm to every one of us, to all aspects that create the quality of life that brought so many of us here to this region. We're here today to focus on solutions, but I think we must first acknowledge the stakes and the pain that this problem has caused. I'm going to call her Katie. During the summer, she was a client of a prominent human services organization here in town. Katie is in her late 20s. She has 3 kids, including a toddler. She works part-time at McDonald's because she can't get 40 hours. Katie and her kids live in a U-Haul truck. I want to say that one more time. They live in a U-Haul truck. There's a single mattress in the enclosed box behind the cab. That space also holds the family's clothes and the kids' backpacks for school. All night, even during the recent blazing summer, Katie locks the truck compartment from the inside for safety. No one has ever hassled the family. No one takes notice of a parked U-Haul or thinks about what it might contain or who. To Katie, this housing crisis is existential. I'm going to call her Margaret. She was a client of another agency. She's 72. Margaret has a master's degree and speaks 4 languages. But for all her intelligence, she couldn't figure out how to pay the double-digit rent increase she was facing. This summer, she took to sleeping in her car at the agency where she sought help. The stress of homelessness and the heat seemed to exacerbate the dementia that began emerging. Baker acted several times. She was always released and always returned to her car. Margaret was finally accepted into a place that could address her challenges. To Margaret, this housing crisis is existential. For 2 people, the housing struggle was all they could take. The loss of their homes brought them to contemplation of suicide. Deputies were able to save one, but not the other. The crisis has brought evictions, about 850 per year in Sarasota County. Losing the roof over your head is a trauma, and it can build on traumas recently past. Our frontline responders see lots of trauma. 2 deputies left the eviction team, and I think all of us can understand their emotions. Fortunately, there is help. A partnership between the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office and United Way of South Sarasota County is working to make the eviction process less scarring and sometimes even headed off. 92% of those they have served are unemployed or elderly. 86% have mental health issues. 78% are losing their homes for the very first time. For these neighbors of ours, this housing crisis is existential. The demand for help from Season of Sharing, one of our region's most effective safety nets, has been unprecedented, and much of it is housing related. 211, the number where callers seek essential community services, received 6,000 calls during the height of the pandemic. In the most recent 12 months, there were 8,200 calls. You can guess the top concern. A partnership between the Sarasota Herald Tribune and the Community Foundation of Sarasota County, Season of Sharing was created as a way of helping people on the brink of homelessness. People who have been helped frequently later donate themselves in what I consider a sublime example of paying it forward. During my time at the Herald Tribune, this community's generosity was nothing short of astounding. Last year, SOS reached a once unthinkable $3.7 million in donations. This year, SOS will pay out $5 million, and it won't be enough. 4,500 households, double the number during the pandemic's height, will be helped. Many are seeking a hand up for the first time in their lives. To them, this housing crisis is existential. Growing up in Manatee County and working around the region as a reporter, I remember people worrying a lot about Southwest Florida's brain drain. When I was a young man, my friends had to leave the area for a 4-year degree. That's no longer necessary. People also worried that we lack the kind of jobs to pull our graduates back. Economic developers have focused on industry nodes, life sciences, and high-tech manufacturing than on the growing creative sector, and their work has helped diversify our economy and create more attractive jobs. But I now think there's something even more pervasive than these threats. People are departing our community like a train leaving the station for more promising vistas, chugging away in search of more affordable housing options along with the jobs to pay for them. Our economy has been fueled for decades by an influx of new residents of all means. My family came to Manatee County in 1975. My parents, one with a job and another seeking one, stretched their budget enormously to buy a canal-front home for $55,000. It's a meager amount by today's standards, but a frightening stretch for my folks. But this was Florida, a paradise for the snow-weary with boundless opportunity. Today, that kind of dream is out of reach for many. The landscape has shifted. A growing population demanded more services. Restaurants stopped shutting down in the summers as they did when I was a kid. Companies relocated to the region, drawn by the same opportunities and lifestyle that drew my family. But somewhere in the intervening decades, starter homes and reasonably priced apartments stopped entering the picture. With land more scarce, what made more sense on a dearly bought lot? A $600,000 home or a $300,000 starter? The gulf grew wider and wider. Wide enough now that even employees earning sizable salaries turn down jobs or never pursue them after looking at our housing situation. Vacancies at some critical institutions hover around 20% or more. To those dealing with those factors, the housing crisis is existential. Let me take that earlier locomotive metaphor a step further. Trains are powerful machines. They take people through their journey at high speeds, but afford an opportunity to really enjoy the ride. Let's, for a moment, think of our community and its economy as a train. Who rides? Passengers, of course. But a procession of people really make the train go. They steer it, they repair it, sometimes en route. They tend to guests. What do they share in common? When working, they live on the train. The train needs accommodations for everyone, not always equal, but adequate. Train drivers, dispatchers, diesel mechanics, railroad conductors, firefighters, signal maintainers, car tenders, locomotive electricians, porters, waiters, chefs. Somewhere along the line, our train started losing some of these folks. It is still moving along, but passengers are finding it more difficult to be helped. Could enough people leave that the train starts slowing? If it goes too slow, is it still an appealing mode of travel? As someone who loves to travel on this particular train, I don't want to find out. To folks leaving the train, this housing crisis is existential. It is slowly but surely eroding the community we came here for. The one with the culture, the amenities, and the company of amazing people who have made our place one with a per capita IQ that is simply off the charts. But we can do something about it. Other communities, less accomplished and less resourced, have done it. We already have one plan that we will hear about today. It is just waiting to be executed. But this is a job, switching metaphors here, that requires all hands on deck, all of you. Now I'm going to turn things over to someone who not only shares my birthday, but a passion for this community, to make this community a better place. Chamber CEO Heather Caston. Heather is going to tell you what business leaders like yourselves, established and up and coming, have shared about this housing situation. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Matt, for that incredibly eye-opening opener for us today. I also want to thank each of you for creating space in your calendar to be a part of today's event and conversation. We know that each of you are leaders in your organizations, and time is your most precious resource. Thank you for being here today. I also want to thank our public officials. We have several in the room today. I want to acknowledge School Board Member Tom Edwards, County Commissioner Mark Smith, City Manager Marlon Brown, Deputy City Manager Pat Robinson, and City Commissioner Debbie Trice. Did I miss anyone? Because that is the last thing we want to do. Did I miss any of our public officials? Well, thank you as well for being here today. And I also want to acknowledge we have several chamber board members here today in the audience. Would you please stand so we can recognize our chamber board members as well? So as as Matt mentioned, I am President and CEO of the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce. We work with over 1,300 local businesses that employ over 60,000 employees. For years, we've kind of heard the nonprofits talking about this issue of affordable housing, but it's really only been the last 2 years or so that this issue has really started to hit and impact the business community and our ability to hire, retain, and recruit employees to our local companies. The space within this issue that I'll specifically be speaking about today, and most of the speakers as well, is that space of workforce housing. These are folks who are employed and in many instances working multiple jobs but still struggle to find affordable housing. You'll hear that phrase, affordable housing, multiple times throughout many presentations today. And just as a definition so that we can all make sure we're singing off the same sheet of music, affordable housing is defined as if housing it's affordable for an individual if it is less than 30% of their gross income. The Chamber, along with our partners in today's event, which you'll see on the screen and on the banners, wanted to bring business leaders and policymakers together today to learn more about this issue, to share some findings and some potential solutions with all of you. To start off my part of the program, we'll be sharing 2 surveys that our Chamber did with our members that can help frame today's conversation in context. The first survey we garnered from our businesses was one we did last September. We asked companies and business leaders the impact to their businesses around the issue of affordable housing. You can see on the screen we had over 248 responses from a diverse cross-sector of industries represented, and a couple of the remarkable stats that you'll see on the screen. You'll see that 73% of businesses said that their ability to do business was being affected because of the lack of affordable housing. The impact to employees, over 79%. And then an interesting finding, 91%, was that when we asked, would you be in support as a business owner of zoning changes that would help create solutions around affordable housing? 91% said that they would. We know that over 1,500 of our responses came from people who actually turned down jobs in our area because of the lack of affordable housing. And the survey also revealed that single employees are having a really difficult time, the most difficult time. If we go to the next slide, there's some key commerce impacts that I won't, and I know that the print is tiny, and I do want to share that we will have this available document for everyone in the room. But some of those key impacts: struggling to retain current staff, inability to attract new hires, decreased employee morale, declining productivity, and rising wages not being able to keep up with the cost of living. It was interesting, one tech CEO commented that the issue of affordable housing is the single most important issue for his company. He states that his company is trying to attract the type of young professional that our community should want, to stay in Sarasota. So you can see from the comments from the employers and the impact on their businesses, and also some of the suggestions made from the business community, you're going to be hearing more about those solutions in the coming presentations. You want to go to the next slide? And then just a few months ago, we also surveyed our young professional group. These are individuals under the age of 40 years old. We were blown away with a response rate of over 500 responses from this age sector. You'll see on the screen that 96% reported that housing is negatively affecting the economy, and 7 out of 10 young professionals are considering leaving Sarasota due to the cost of housing. 5% are cost burden, which again means that they're spending more than 30% of their gross income on housing. A finding that I personally found disheartening was that YPG members travel on average 28 miles round trip to their place of employment, and 20% of our young professionals are commuting over 40 miles per day. Let's go to the next slide. Next, when looking at just the aspirations of this age group and demographic, we see 50% of this group, 54% of this group are renting, 8% are living with family members. You can also see from the screen the preferences for the type of home and location of homes that were preferred by the survey. A couple of key themes from the comments were that YPG members believe there is a disconnect between local wages and our cost of living. They feel that the community caters more to tourists. So you can see and feel the real gravity of this housing issue and why we're here today to work towards bringing solutions and partnering with our policymakers to address this need for the community that we all love and call home, Sarasota. Now I'm honored to introduce my colleague and friend, John Thaxton.
I had the honor of chairing this very diverse group, and I would offer to you that all of the recommendations that I am going to go over today were adopted by a unanimous vote of all members of the city and the county advisory committee. And it was a very diverse group. We had builders, we had bankers, we had providers, legal experts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it just wasn't a grouping of people with like minds. We all had diverse backgrounds, but we all shared in the same passion of affordable housing. We also invited guest speakers, including out-of-town developers and subject matter experts. We reviewed national best practices. And then what we did was we took these talks and this information and we adapted them to the conditions in Sarasota. I feel pretty good that we struck the right chord, because when we left, there was just as many people upset with the recommendations as the people that were complimenting the recommendations. And so we felt probably that is about as best as we're going to do. I want to expand a little bit on what Heather said about a common understanding that we kind of need to come to in order to have a productive discussion on affordable housing. And what I mean by that is understanding the definition, which she went over, defining the problem, and then identifying activities that actually address the problem. Our committee agreed the definition of affordable housing is very simple. If you have to spend more than 30% of your household income to maintain housing, it's not affordable housing. That's it, real simple. And we're seeing today the growth in that by the number of people that are in this room, where affordable housing used to only affect a very, very small sector of our community, back when I was doing it 30-something years ago. Now the spectrum of impact is huge, it's very big, and it's moved into our economy. The problem is also relatively simple to define. We have an affordable housing demand that far exceeds the affordable housing supply. Now the marketplace does this really fantastic job of providing housing to the upper incomes. Lots of money there, easy to permit, easy to get loans, and so that's kind of where the market has gravitated over the last 34 years. But not to the market's blame, but the reality is it's financially impossible to build housing affordable to people making under 100% AMI in Sarasota County. In fact, it's really hard to do it under 200% of AMI because of the cost of land, the cost of labor, the cost of construction material, the cost of permitting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. By the time you factor all those in, you cannot produce affordable housing in Sarasota County for over 40% of our households, which equates to 60,000 households now in Sarasota County spending more than 30% of their income on housing. So what's the solution? Also pretty simple to say, but very difficult to implement. The solution to affordable housing is making sure that you reduce the deficit that we have today of affordable housing needs, and that we do not exacerbate that imbalance of supply and demand going into the future. So you have to have both kind of working in tandem in order to get to a good solution. So I am going to go now into the recommendations of the advisory committee. There are 12 of them. The first 11 of them are required by Florida law. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those, but I am going to let you know what each one of them are. And many of these recommendations have been included in the advisory committee's report to the city and the county commission. And I would also add that we have one city commissioner and one county commissioner that now serves on this advisory committee. Recommendation number 1. The process of approvals for development for permits needs to enjoy expedited permitting. No big deal. Important, but we're doing that. Both the city and the county have adopted ordinances that give these permits the ability to move to the top of the review stack. Number 2, deals with the modification of impact fees. Impact fees have virtually no impact on the cost of luxury homes, but impact fees very much affect the affordability of the lower income housing. So what the county commission did was provide for a tier system so that the lower and the less expensive of the home, the greater the impact fee that you get. Check that one. Also substantially complete in both the city and the county. Number 3 is allowed for flexible densities. Once again, both the city and the county have accommodated this and met the state law. I would like to add, though, that density alone is not a solution to affordable housing. However, you will not have an affordable housing that does not include increased density. Let me explain what I mean. We have been increasing density in Sarasota County and opening more land for development in Sarasota County for over 40 years, and it has not produced any affordable housing units except for those units that were required by law. Number 4 I kind of scratched off because we're supposed to have a reservation of infrastructure capacity. And this only deals with with concurrency. But the state has done away with concurrency. You don't now have to have adequate roads or schools or things like that substantially. So there really is no requirement for infrastructure capacity reserves. Another recommendation or another requirement of the state is accessory dwelling units. This is building garage apartments and things. Once again, the city and the county, check it off. They did it. Very good. Number 6, reduction of parking and setbacks. Again, check it off. It's done. Number 7, flexible lot configurations. Both the city and the county, check it off. It's done. You see, they're doing actually pretty good, right? It's all sounding wonderful so far. Street requirements, again, both done. Number 9 is that anytime the county or the city passes a new ordinance, that they need to consider the impact to the cost of housing of that ordinance. Done. Both the city and the county have ordinances that do that. Another one is to prepare an inventory of publicly owned lands that the market can use to offset the cost of land in the total equation of the cost of affordable housing. Again, both the city and the county have done that. The county has 3 pending projects now, 4644 North Tamiami Trail, Martin Luther King and Tuttle, and a project down in Inglewood. Check it off. It's done. Number 11 is that we're supposed to be developing near transportation hubs and employment centers, and we've done that also. So, what's the problem, right? We've done all the 11 things, and affordable housing supply and demand is still out of whack, and the problem is getting worse, not better. So, the committee went on to recommend other policies that we should be considering, and this is kind of where the rubber meets the road. So I'm going to go through those also relatively quickly, but I'll be spending a little bit more time on them. Number 1, Sarasota County needs to identify a dedicated and renewable funding source for an affordable housing trust fund. That would be a fund that would be used to offset the cost of building affordable housing to developers to make affordable housing more profitable for developers to come into our community and do it. We have a state fund, but as most of us know, it hasn't been very trustworthy in the years. Our committee actually came up with a recommendation on how to do this. I thought this was a great recommendation. I wish I thought of it myself. It actually came from Drayton Saunders, one of the leading real estate brokers in the southeastern United States. And the suggestion is that the county take a very small portion of the increase in property taxes that accrue to the general fund budget and appropriate that to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which would mean that for the last 28 out of the last 30 years, money would have went into that fund. There's a rational nexus to it. It makes a lot of sense. And it also provides for local control. It allows our county commissioners to make the decision on how that money is to be spent. The other one is to have studies conducted relative to compatibility. You hear a lot about NIMBYs. NIMBYs is very real. NIMBYs are very much an impediment to building affordable housing in Sarasota County. A compatibility study will show and demonstrate that this affordable housing that we're building today is housing with dignity. It has architecture relief. It is made of quality products. It is not the slums of yesterday. And in fact, when you show most people a picture of what 12 units per acre looks like, and you ask them how many units per acre this is, they'll tell you 3 or 4 or 5. They really don't understand that these affordable housing units are not going to compromise their property values. They're not going to in any way impact their quality of life other than to improve it. Another recommendation that the committee had was that during land use hearings, that the cities and the county commissions consider the impact of that policy decision on affordable housing. Very simple idea. The idea is that if I'm looking to take a ranch land and turn it into a residential subdivision, is that going to increase the demand for affordable housing? Is it going to have no impact? Or is it going to actually decrease the need for affordable housing? We don't do that. We haven't done it in decades. It needs to be a discussion that we have at every land use decision. Now here's the one that probably causes the most heartache. It's called mandatory inclusionary zoning. And the concept behind mandatory inclusionary zoning is that when we build these luxury condominiums, when we build these gated communities and advertise concierge service and fancy restaurants and maintenance-free lifestyles, all of the workforce that provides that quality of life that we all come to expect and what every citizen moving into this community expect comes from the service workforce whose wages cannot meet or even come close to the 30% threshold. One of the major drivers, the 2 major drivers in our affordable housing crisis is the cost of housing, and secondly, the number of service workforce demand that we are creating by approving these luxury subdivisions. And I'm not suggesting that we stop doing that. That was my business and industry for years, but what mandatory inclusionary zoning says is that if you are creating a demand in your subdivision for 20 affordable housing units, then you must provide for 20 affordable housing units. So in other words, mandatory zoning will do nothing to reduce the gap, the deficiency we had. It's our only demand side management tool that helps us from preventing us from digging the hole deeper and deeper and deeper. It is consistent with state law. It will only be on developments that are asking for increases in density or intensity, and only those larger developments over 15 units. I would offer that this may not be the only solution to meeting the new demands for affordable housing, but nobody that I have met with has come up with an alternative. So we're certainly open to other ideas, but presently those other ideas have not materialized. Next recommendation is a voluntary density bonus program. This is where a developer is not requesting for increased density or intensity, they already have it, but in order to get more affordable housing, we will offer that developer more units than he or she is entitled with the present zoning, provided that a certain percentage of those development units are in the affordable housing range. And by the way, when we talk about affordable housing, we tend to talk in terms of AMI, that 80% of area median income or 100% or below. And we were also talking about a term of affordability for those affordable housing units for at least 30 years. Why 30 years? Because if you're going to give up something such as a government subsidy, you need to get something in return. What we're getting in return is affordable housing. And as long as that demand for affordable housing unit is there, the supply needs to go with it. And the best estimate that we have is that we will be needing that unit for at least the next 30 years. The last 2 I have are redevelopment of commercial properties. This is one of the greatest missed opportunities that this community has. We have all of these derelict strip centers and shopping centers that already have vested trip counts in terms of traffic. They've already made these huge impervious surfaces. So the only thing that we can frankly do to these is further reduce traffic and further improve the environment by adding affordable housing options to this. The problem is that many of the developers will not do it because it is uncertain that they're going to be able to get permits to do it. So we need to be looking at some sort of a mechanism where the developer's assurance that if they come in and spend all this money to convert the shopping center to affordable housing, that they're actually going to be able to get approval for it. And then the last recommendation from the City County Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, and this one is only for the county, this one is not in the, on the city side. And that is that the county reappropriate $20 million of the infrastructure surtax money, which is $1 billion, towards affordable housing. Now, state law requires that that money only be spent on land for affordable housing. But we're already seeing with the surplus land programs, the power that this has by removing the cost of land from a development funding stack. It just makes it so much more accessible for the developer to build a unit and make a profit. Presently, there is no money in the infrastructure surtax dedicated to affordable housing. And considering it is a priority of the county, it is a priority for many of the people in this room, the committee felt that an appropriation of $20 million would go a long way in providing for affordable housing. And we've seen that in the County Commission's decisions to first appropriate $25 million of the ARPA money. That facilitated the creation of 720 some odd units of affordable housing. And now the County Commission is also looking at appropriating $40 million from the CDBG-DR, which is the Sarasota Resilient Sarasota monies. That's going to go a long way. But again, those monies are one time. They are not going to meet the needs of the community going forward. And of course, that is the genesis of our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So those are the recommendations of your Affordable Housing Advisory Committee for both the city and the county of Sarasota. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker. I need to look at my notes because I can't remember the name, but I can certainly remember the word. I got it. I know. I got a minute to spare, don't I? Yeah. Tell a joke. No. Ali Ankudovich. There it is. I got it right. Ankudovich. Right. She works for the Florida Housing Coalition, and this is a remarkable group of individuals. They are the leading state advocacy agency for affordable housing. They were one of the agencies that appeared before the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. They have done it many years in the past, giving us all this information, but the specific target that the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee wanted the Florida Housing Coalition expert to give us was on the Live Local Act. This is a complicated piece of legislation. And there's very few of us, there's probably 3 people in the room that can articulate the nuances of this act, but it's critical, it's important, and we all need to be made aware of it. So, Ali, I'm going to call you up, and you can clear up all of the myths and all the fogginess with the Live Local Act. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks so much, John. Yeah, we'll see how much fogginess we can clear up in 10 minutes. So I'm definitely going to hit the highlights here, but I just want to say I'm so pleased to be here, and thanks to the Sarasota Chamber for putting on this really important event today. Glad to be here. So I'm going to be talking about the Live Local Act. You may have heard about this in the news a lot, and today I really just want to focus on some opportunities that might be of interest to you, particularly from a business perspective, or perhaps if you happen to own land that's zoned for commercial, industrial, or mixed use. So again, just going to hit the highlights. You're going to see a lot of information on the slides. That's so that if you look back at them later, you can remember what the heck I was talking about a little bit. But I've linked some additional resources at the end if you want to take a deeper dive on any of the things you hear about today. A little bit more on the Florida Housing Coalition. We are a statewide nonprofit. We primarily provide training and technical assistance to local governments and affordable nonprofit affordable housing developers on all things affordable housing, but certainly a part of our mission is connecting with more folks who are interested in plugging into this topic, including businesses and chambers of commerce. So that's just one more reason I'm jazzed to be with you here today. So as John mentioned, this was a complicated act. It was 95 pages of legislation that was passed earlier this year. And I have boiled it down into 6 bullet points on this slide. I'm just going to be talking about those first 3 bullet points there. But again, there's some additional resources afterwards. So the first thing is funding. And this is a big table with a number of items, and it's really just to show all the different angles at which state funding is trying to tackle the housing affordability issue. And the first 2 I just want to highlight there are the 2 major state funding programs for affordable housing. The State Housing Initiatives Partnership Program, SHIP, that primarily focuses on home ownership for low-income households, and then the State Apartment Incentive Loan Program. So this is a competitive program primarily focused on rental housing, focusing on producing units around that 60% AMI threshold, generally speaking, and that's something that developers apply to make their projects go from a funding perspective. So these programs require an act of appropriation by the legislature each year, and I'm happy to say that they were fully funded through the Live Local Act. And in addition to that full funding, we had a pledge of an additional $150 million a year for 10 years for a program very like sales. So again, focusing on beefing up resources for rental housing. I want to highlight another recent update that just came down the pipeline, the Hometown Hero program. So that focuses on providing purchase assistance to home buyers in Florida, eligible home buyers. The initial funding for that was spoken for almost immediately, and that just recently reopened with an additional $36 million in funding. And the last thing I want to highlight here that I will talk about in a little bit more detail is a new Live Local Tax Donation Program. So if you have state, corporate, or insurance premium tax liability, you can make a donation and get tax credits for that. So that's a new program that supports the sale rental program. So it is really great to be able to say that we have all of this state funding coming down the pipeline, but I also want to highlight that the local strategies and funding sources that John just talked about are still really, really important. Because when you look at how that state funding plays out across all the cities and counties who are going to be using it, we still need all the resources that we're talking about locally to get where we need to be for housing affordability. So what this SHIP, that home ownership focused program, what the SHIP funding looks like at a local level, if you look at what's been allocated for the city and municipalities who will receive that in Sarasota County, you'll see a bump in a little under $1 million in funding from the year prior to this year. And then here's a breakdown on the sale funding. So that's that rental program that I mentioned. So that's broken down for different sizes of counties, small, medium, and large. So Sarasota County falls in that medium category. Funding for those counties is $58 million roughly. So developers across 29 different medium counties are going to be applying for that funding for their projects. So tax credit programs. So I mentioned that there was a new one on the books, but the Live Local Act also expanded some opportunities through an existing tax credit program. So the Community Contribution Tax Credit Program, the Live Local Act expanded the cap of tax credits that could be used for housing up to $25 million. So businesses can donate to eligible projects, and then you can get a credit of 50% of value back on your state, corporate, or insurance premium taxes, and that can also be used as a sales tax refund So you can apply through Florida Commerce for that, and I provided details at the end of the presentation on that. The new one that was established that I mentioned earlier is the Live Local program tax credit. So that has a cap of up to $100 million in tax credits. And again, that goes to support that sale rental program that I mentioned earlier, and that provides a dollar for dollar tax credit against corporate and insurance premium tax liability. And for that, you apply through the Florida Department of Revenue, and there's more details on that program as well. So turning to the land use preemption. So this is probably what you've been seeing news about the most, and a lot of local governments have been grappling with this particular provision of the act. So I'm going to lay out just a few of the objective parameters here. So what this preemption did from a land use and zoning perspective is the act introduced use, density, and height standards that eligible affordable housing projects can take advantage of in commercial, industrial, or mixed-use zoning areas. So these are areas that may not have already been zoned for a housing use that could to kind of facilitate housing in those areas. So eligible projects need to set aside 40% of their units as affordable, up to 120% of that area median income level that John referenced earlier with AMI for at least 30 years. And then there's some additional provisions for mixed-use projects. So the idea here is to promote some more site opportunities for affordable housing. But I want to note that all other state and local laws apply, so there are some conditions still that need to be met that may also affect how widely this tool is used. Here's just an example in Hillsborough County where a project has already been approved with use of this preemption. It's going to result in 606 units. And then here's just some mapping of areas with this commercial, industrial, mixed-use zones in the city and the county. Each city and county is going to be kind of defining what this looks like exactly for their specific context, but this just gives you an idea of what this would look like for this local area. And I just want to note that while this has been a bit contentious for local governments, there's still some opportunities to guide growth locally with affordable units. And I just want to highlight one local example here among all the great things happening at the city and county. So City of Sarasota just recently this year passed a density bonus for affordable housing. So 4 times the density in 4 downtown districts for a 15% set aside of affordable units. That targets that 60 to 120% AMI level. So the idea here is that there's still opportunities that are at the discretion of local governments to really target where that growth is going to happen, get those affordable units, and provide some avenues to make that happen. And you can check out all the great strategies that are listed on the website and that John talked about earlier. And the last thing I'll highlight here is just a couple of additional property tax exemptions that were introduced by this bill. And really the main message here is that there's just some additional things to sweeten the pot to make some of these affordable housing developments go. So this first one, the local option, affordable housing property tax exemption, that would need to be actively adopted by an ordinance by a local government. And so that would primarily serve households up to 60% AMI with other conditions met. And then the other 2 that you see listed there do not require local action to adopt. So one would be in the case of nonprofit land use with a 99-year ground lease for affordable housing, and then also a missing middle property tax exemption. If you meet the conditions there, that would serve households up to 120% AMI. So these are the additional resources if you want to check those out, and I will be happy to answer any questions later. Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody, again. I talked about impact at the beginning of our gathering, and I just want to give you a piece of, as I would have said in my old life, hot off the press news. You may have seen it today, some of us roll our eyes when we see how our region is rated for various things like retiring and that sort of thing. But today there was something that occurred that's very much on point with what we're talking about today. U.S. News and World Report, best places to retire, Sarasota finished at number 18. We had finished number 12 the previous year, and we've topped that list in the past. You can guess what was cited as one of the biggest changes to the formula that they measured there. We are now behind Daytona Beach, which jumped to 8th, and Tampa, which jumped to 12th. So I'm going to go over some best practices from across the country. The good news is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know I was advancing. The good news is we don't have to reinvent the wheel. As you heard from John Faxton, we already have our own wheel, and there's always room for new ideas. As part of this event, when we were putting it together, we had a, as part of this work group, we had a policy analyst from Florida Policy Institute do a survey of national policies. She just shut the door for us and is sitting down. This is Cicely Hodges. Cicely has been on the ground working in affordable housing in South Florida. She earned a JD from the University of Miami and then settled into this new position. So thanks, Cicely, for putting this together for us. And she did that with the help of Deborah Chapman, who's here with us today also. And many of you know Deborah. Deborah is an expert on so many things and helped put together this lovely presentation. You go to the next slide. So these are the 4 practices. I'm going to let you digest those for a moment. I think some of them look familiar. You've heard them, and redundancy is good because one of the points we're trying to make here is that good ideas tend to be replicated all around the country, and we're going to go through these ideas and give you a sort of best practice example of it. So the first is inclusionary zoning, which John just talked to you about. This would require or incentivize the inclusion of some workforce housing in all projects. It's typically a percentage of the total, and the rental rates assigned to these units are critical to getting them to the people who are in need. Our best practice example, next slide, I'm sorry, is Montgomery County, Maryland. They have a program called the Moderately Priced Dwelling Unit Program. It's one of the oldest in the nation. 12.5 to 15% of new projects must have workforce housing. 40% of those units are made available to the county's public housing agency or a nonprofit. So the MPDU, as it's called, creates more than 300 units each year. It's created 15,000 since its inception. And the beauty of this, of course, is it is perpetually increasing the workforce housing supply. The next strategy is increased density in residential zoning. This allows neighborhoods to use a multitude of housing options, everything from standard single-family houses to duplexes, triplexes, tiny homes, and accessory dwelling units. It allows for more density, but it also maintains a residential character. There was a national study this year of 200 metros by the American Enterprise Institute that shows this has been a win-win-win situation. There is more naturally affordable homes. There's a substantial increase in supply, and for our government friends in the audience, more tax revenue per acre. Our best practice example is San Diego, California. Their light touch density increases have resulted in nearly 1/3 more homes built each year, a 10% reduction in pricing, and a 21% increase in property tax revenue. For our third strategy, this sounds again familiar, it's one of the recommendations from the Affordable Housing Committee, create a community land trust. These entities retain ownership of the land a home is built on. The buyer only has to pay for the house. Community land trust homes are affordable in perpetuity because of resale restrictions. Lower income residents no longer have to pay rent, and they build equity now and potentially for future generations. Our best practice example, Burlington, Vermont. It's called the Champlain Housing Trust. It was a pioneer in this work. They established the CLT in 1984. The homes are available to households earning 57% of area median income. That's a great target number. Those are folks that are really in need. The CHT has 2,200 units now. That includes rental properties, cooperative homes, and apartments. And finally, strategy 4, again, it's going to sound familiar. Establish and fund a housing trust. This is a governmental trust set up to support affordable housing activities in a variety of approaches. Many communities have dedicated public revenue, and this is a bonus because it's not subject to the restrictions of federal programs. It can be tailored to meet local priorities and needs. If you have HUD funding, if you have federal funding for your project, you cannot dictate that I want this to serve teachers or I want this to serve police officers. You are required to use the federal standards. Our best practice example, Austin, Texas. It dedicates property tax revenue for projects built on land that was previously owned by the city. Austin directs all of that revenue to the trust, and to date, this work has supported the creation or preservation of 1,418 affordable homes. These obviously are just some of the possibilities. There are others, and will make for a wonderful community discussion. Now I'm going to turn it over to Steve Hyatt, who runs the Program Management Division at Sarasota County Government. He's going to talk about Resilient SRQ and its work to ameliorate the housing crisis. Thank you very much.
All right, good afternoon, and thank you for the introductions and for allowing us to be here. I'm Steve Hyatt. I'm the division manager with a division called Program Management with Sarasota County and the Office of Financial Management. And we're overseeing three main areas of programs here at the county. The first of which is some of our HUD entitlement funding, our community development block grants, emergency solutions grant, neighborhood stabilization program. The second of which is, as John mentioned earlier, the American Rescue Plan Act, the state and local fiscal recovery funds, and that includes about $84.2 million that we received from the U.S. Treasury. Included $25 million towards affordable housing efforts, 8 projects there, running from about 60 to 120% AMI, and with at least 30 years of land use restrictions affordability on those projects. But here today, we're going to talk about our third and our largest program is what we're entitled the Resilient SRQ program. This is a very unique set of circumstances and funding that Sarasota County received as a result of Hurricane Ian. We're one of 4 counties in the state of Florida that has received what's known as a direct allocation of community development block grant disaster recovery funds. That amount is over $201 million of funds that has been directly allocated to Sarasota County. These funds are typically only allocated to states. So the state of Florida has received this funding allocation, and we are fortunate to have received that directly and have a lot of control over that. So I'm here just to kick things off, but I'd like to turn it over here to Laurel Varnell. She is our program manager over the Resilient SRQ program. And some of you have definitely known her. She ran the business assistance component of the Sarasota Cares program, and then the emergency rental assistance program, which was a major accomplishment here in Sarasota County. So, turn it over.
All right, thank you, and thanks for having us. So again, my name is Laurel Varnell, and I'm the program manager for Resilient SRQ. So we're saving you, we can't say CDBGTR, we call it Resilient SRQ. So this is just a quick timeline of where we were and where we're going. You can see in May 2023 is when we first found out that Sarasota County was going to receive over $200 million in CDBGTR funds. So from there, we started initiating public engagement. So we met with many of you who are in this room. We had many public meetings, we had surveys, we had a lot of different types of ways to get input from the community about their unmet needs following Hurricane Ian and what they wanted to see these funds directed towards. So from that, we came up with a draft action plan, and the action plan is essentially a roadmap which shows our board and shows the public and HUD how we intend to spend these funds. So we developed an action plan that can be found on our website, and then in September we received approval from our Board of County Commission, and then we submitted that action plan to HUD. So right now we're in the waiting stage. We submitted our plan to HUD, and we're hoping that we receive approval here, hope in the next few weeks or so. We submit at the end of September. They have 60 days to get back to us. Here's an example of some of the eligible activities. So I won't go through all of them, but I'll highlight, obviously, affordable housing is one of those eligible activities alongside a homeowner rehabilitation and reconstruction of homes for those homeowners who had damage from Hurricane Ian. There's many funding requirements, as I'm sure you can imagine, with the HUD program. So the first is that 70% of our total funds must be used to support LMI persons. So they define that as 80% or below Sarasota County's area median income. Also must meet a HUD national objective and must have a tie back to Hurricane Ian, either directly or indirectly. Fortunately, affordable housing is considered an indirect tie back because we know that we lost some housing stock during the storm. So we're able to use this indirect tie back for affordable housing. All funds must be used in Sarasota County within 6 years. So that's 6 years of us signing the grant agreement. So once HUD approves it, we'll sign the grant agreement, and that starts our clock of 6 years to spend these funds. All funds also must address an unmet need, so there cannot be another funding source available. It can be used to leverage funds, and HUD encourages using multiple funding sources to fund a project, but you can't swap out a funding source. There can be, it's supposed to make a fund for gaps in funding. And this is hard to read, but very quickly I'll just tell you how we came up with our recommendations for our action plan. The first is that we used an unmet needs analysis, and this was looking at data from FEMA, from SBA. We also had stakeholder engagement. We did surveys and public meetings, and we also looked at program best practices. So we looked at across the country who's used these funds before and how do they do so effectively within the time frame. And that's how we came up with our program recommendations, which you'll see here. We have several different buckets of funding, and I'm going to focus here on the housing. So the first one, you can see we have $101 million currently allocated towards the overall bucket of housing, which includes a voluntary home buyout program. These are for folks who are in repetitive loss areas, an option to buy out their property. Homeowner reimbursement for people who've already made those repairs to their homes from Hurricane Ian will offer reimbursement. New affordable multifamily housing, you can see $40 million allocated towards that bucket. And then homeowner rehabilitation reconstruction for those folks who are 80% or below our area median income, who have not been able to successfully rehabilitate or reconstruct their home. So getting in a little bit into the eligibility criteria for new multifamily affordable housing. The first is that all affordable housing projects must meet HUD cross-cutting requirements. So these are other national requirements that HUD sets that we have to also ensure that all of the projects meet. The first is Davis-Bacon wage requirements, and these are wage requirements that are set at the federal level that must be met for a construction project. The other is Section 3 requirements, and this is for priority in contracting and training for low and very low income persons. And that's for any project receiving over $200,000. So there's many other requirements and things you have to meet for that Section 3 requirement. There's also an environmental review, so you have to show that if there are environmental impacts, that you're mitigating those concerns. And then there's also construction standards and environmental standards that you have to meet. So we know it's a lot. We are trying to work with people to help them understand the requirements and also make sure that we are in compliance with the federal government. They also have to have 51% of the units to be affordable with a minimum affordability period of 20 years, and that is a number that's set by HUD. And eligible applicants are nonprofit developers, for-profit, municipalities, and public housing authorities. So we're still in the early stages of planning. We haven't officially received HUD approval, so we have recommended that $40 million to HUD. We're hoping they come back and they say yes. And there is an option for us to modify that number over time. So if we dive into a project we realize it's not going to, we're not going to spend the funds within a given time. We're able to reallocate once we've gotten the official approval from HUD. So our staff are quickly developing program criteria and application processes. It will probably look similar to how the ARPA program was run, where we'll receive a lot of project recommendations, and then our board ultimately will select the final project. So there'll be a lot more information to come. We're still very early, we haven't received official approval. We really encourage everyone to check out our website, scgov.net/resilientsrq for updates, and we will absolutely communicate with this group and try to make it very clear when we are accepting applications and project proposals for our affordable housing projects. And I'll put our website and our email also on there, and thank you so much for having us.
Hi, my name is Mark Pencroft. I'm the managing partner of One Stop Housing. Very much appreciate being here. We're going to give you, I was asked to give a developer's perspective on what's happening. So I thought I'd do more of a under the hood, if you don't mind. And I think that'll help to give some understanding between why there isn't as much workforce housing out there, what some of the challenges are, and as well as maybe give you my 2 cents for what it's worth on some of this. Just to give you a little background, One Stop Housing was started almost 40 years ago from my father, Harvey Vengroff, who some of you may know, have known. We're currently managing and operating over 4,000 workforce housing units, all of which is, our rents are all set at 80% of AMI or less, not the income, but the rents. We have our own construction company, a management company, and a wraparound for a nonprofit that does a lot of the wraparound services. Our belief and our mantra has always been that if you work, you deserve and earn to be able to have a place you can call your own, that you can afford for yourself. And so I was going to go through, there's 5 main challenges to building and operating workforce housing that I thought we'd uncover. First is the increased land costs. So obviously land costs get increased. The interesting thing is you can increase the density, and depending on some scenarios where we would go in, we actually had a district that we were ready to start acquiring a bunch of homes that needed some work that we were going to acquire, and then the density was improved, and where you can double the number of units on those plots, and as a result the landowners all felt like it's now worth twice the original price, so we were priced out. But that doesn't happen all the case. The very appreciative of Live Local because of the administrative review process versus the public hearing. I have to tell you that saves months, and months really equates to a lot of dollars in tying up land. The other area here is on the cost of operating. I'll talk about the cost of construction, but one big factor is in actually operating once it's up and running to make sure that it's profitable and sustainable over time. And there's 3 big areas: property taxes, insurance, and utilities. Now utilities for us, all of our rents include utilities, so I factored it in here. But over 50% are really tied to these 3 areas of expense. So with the Live Local Act, that's been very helpful because obviously that gets rid of property tax if you're property tax exempt, being 70 units or more and 10% below market. The challenge with that, we've applied on 6 different properties, developments under Live Local for the property tax exemption. And the market rate studies you have to order, market rate studies go by the cost per square foot, the rent per square foot, not the overall development, not the overall apartment. And if you know, it's actually more expensive to build smaller units than it is a larger unit by square foot, because you still have 1 kitchen, you still have so many bathrooms, the rest of it is a lot less expensive to build. And as a result, it becomes somewhat of a challenge. I think it'd be a big challenge for a lot of other developers. We've been very fortunate having our own construction. We were able to keep those costs down, and therefore I think we were able to fly through that, so we were really fortunate. That was a nail biter. On the insurance, I'm saying 30 to 100%. I'm being very lenient when I say 30. Most of the time it's 50 to 100 or double on all the various insurances that are out that we would need to require. And that's been a real burden. We've been, ourselves and other developers, I think, that have larger portfolios are able to run it into a self-insured captive through named carriers and a third-party administrator. So we're able to save anywhere between 20 or 40% off our insurance premiums as a result of that. But if you're, and this is a multi-challenge problem, so if you have smaller owner-operators, they're not going to be able to do that because they won't be able to afford those costs. So it'd be wonderful if state or county can come together and somehow help us with this insurance challenge. And then utilities are utilities. We're going to try to do what we can. We're solar, energy efficient, low emission lighting. I mean, there's a number of things, but that's always been a challenge. Construction costs, yeah. We've been very fortunate during COVID. Construction costs, as everyone's aware, has gone through the roof, especially during COVID. It's come back down somewhat, but still very high compared to where it was. So during challenges like that, you get smarter, I guess. And we've been able to learn from when the times got real difficult. So our recommendation or our suggestion for not only us, but for others was really looking at value engineering. So we started looking at the placements of the bathrooms, placements of the kitchen, and getting rid of any space between any plumbing and excess plumbing, electric, and really value engineering these units so we can create a product at a lot lower cost than we did before. And we're currently under development about 800 units. We have about 1,200 units we're developing in addition for others. So, when we're going out and buying, we're buying in bulk. So that's being able to help us to really be efficient in the way that we're approaching this. This is probably the biggest hurdle right now for any housing, for any workforce housing. It's around interest rates. As a result, prior to recent, if you were going to create a development, you basically put up anywhere between 35 to 40% of your capital. The bank, you go get a loan, and you would have the bank put up the other 60, 65%. Well, that's changed because the interest rates are higher and risk profiles are getting more difficult. Their banks now, for the most part, are all requiring about 50%. So now you have to put up an extra 10 to 15% of your capital, which the returns are about the same. So you put another 10 or 15% of your capital, it basically means your returns will be less. And a lot of times, we're seeing a lot of deals that are just not making it through as a result of the interest rates. So to make the matters even more challenging, the debt service coverage used to be, if you were affordable, 1.15. That's basically taking your net operating income divided by the service payment, the debt service payment. Now, the new threshold is 1.25, and that's very challenging on very thin margins for workforce housing to get over a 1.25. So that now you need to rely more on gap funds from the county or the city, impact investments from various foundations, and those always come with some strings. So here, I think I was very happy to hear about the impact fees here in Sarasota. It's not the case in many other counties and cities. And the reason I would want to say why about impact fees is so key. Impact fees is obviously the assessment you get when you build something new. Fire, roads, parks and recreation, you name it. And each one of those, for the most part, are different folks that we would have to negotiate with. So we negotiate with the county, we might agree to 25% of the units to be affordable at 80% or less. And then you get to the school says, oh, well, I see you go up for 25, we want now 30. So you're always negotiating against yourself. It would be wonderful. In our business, we have what's called one neck to choke. You've heard that expression, you're filling the magic with one neck to choke. It would be wonderful if in the county or the city we had one person that we can go to for all of this to help expedite, help us with this matter. Why? Now, we're 100% workforce housing. Most of our properties do not have a LORA, so we're not required. We just artificially keep the rents low. Well, why is this so important? is because when you do have, a property appraiser comes in and assesses the value of the property. If you have rent restrictions, what ends up happening is you end up with a lower property appraisal, and therefore you have less borrowing power. So for us, it's not about the rent, it's about the contractual obligation that then creates this offset that makes it harder. Then with a higher debt coverage, higher leverage, it becomes an interesting challenge. So I didn't want to leave without some really good news anyway. I thought that was a little impressive. There's a lot of great best practices that we've seen that we're adopting that we encourage others to do. I think you might have read in the paper yesterday in Universal Studios and worked with a developer to build housing on their lot. So that created housing for their employees. We're doing the same here. We're working with a lot of different large employers in Sarasota and in Manatee County. And basically it's where the employers are coming together to create housing for their employees in a community with other employers so that it becomes more cost effective. And so I think that's going to help move the needle a little bit. And it's going to take a lot of different things that Chuck mentioned. When the density goes up, leveraging existing land's been very helpful. We've been partnering a lot with landowners that aren't in the real estate space. I'd like to mention, for example, like Michael Saunders. She felt so honored by, privileged from the community really supporting Michael Saunders. And as a result, she wanted to do something more philanthropic and said, hey, I have this beautiful piece of property downtown Sarasota, can you help us to create workforce housing? And so we're working on that, and there's other examples like that that I thought were really cool, where people from the community are coming out and really trying to make a difference. And we're doing a lot to take our abilities to make them available to other mission-driven organizations, a lot of nonprofits and so forth, to help them get over the threshold of some of these challenges. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. This is Kirsten Russell. She's going to take us to board. Kirsten is the Vice President of Community Impact for the Community Foundation of Sarasota County.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you to all of you for being here today. We just heard a lot of information. Hopefully all of you have learned something, and hopefully there's a passion point for you within this. And what we're hoping today is that you take this information and you do something with it. Because we can talk a lot, but we need action. We heard a lot of great recommendations. We heard a lot about possibilities. And these possibilities don't have to be dreams. They're actionable things that we can take away and do something as a community collaboratively. There's no one person or entity in this room. It's not the responsibility of the business community alone, the foundation community, our residents or government. We all come together to create actionable solutions. We are so grateful for the sponsors today, and most especially the Chamber for bringing us together, for realizing that this is an important conversation. And the Chamber and Heather Costin and her team are here to bring you into the loop to help you forge forward what our community needs. All of us here want to we need employees, we need people who can afford to live here, who can and live and work in the place that they call home. So I will leave you with a thought, which is from Matthew Desmond. He says that housing is the sturdiest of footholds for economic mobility. And I think that's what we all want for our community. We want people to be here, to be mobile, to get to a place of stability, and we need affordable housing for that. So thank you for coming today. Thank you for believing in our community and being part of the actionable solutions so that we have a vibrant community of thriving businesses and residents today and for the future. Thanks so much.